Streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
Good afternoon and welcome councillors and to all those that are here as well, to our staff and to our ratepayers, and welcome to each one of you. Just a reminder for mobile phones, if you could turn them off, as we do record and we are live, and we welcome those that may be listening as now, whether in their office or wherever they may be listening to us, welcome along as well. So that's, the apologies I have is Councillor Soward and Councillor Cox, so please be seated. Thank you. No declaration of interest, or is there any declaration of interest, I should say? Yeah, Councillor McKenzie.
I'm not sure what I remember on Northern Suburbs shares.
Oh.
On the grants.
In the grants, okay, thank you. Any other declaration of interest? Confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting held the 21st of October. Move Councillor Spencer, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. No deputations, no petitions. Community reports. Is Mr Hayden Fox there? I haven't seen it. So welcome Mr Hayden Fox, for Healthy Tasmania Project Coordinator. Welcome.
Hello.
Just have that microphone there, it'd be great, thank you. You could move it out from the wall a little bit.
Feels so odd. Morning, everybody. So my name's Hayden Fox, as alluded to, from Healthy Tasmania. I'm the project coordinator. So thanks for having me here today. Before I start, I'd just like to let Deputy Mayor Danny Gibson know I went along and saw the Mamma Mia production, and I wouldn't consider myself to be a theatre goer, but I really enjoyed it, so well done, Danny and team. Although that production was great, I haven't been invited here today to talk all about that, because I'm sure Danny's told you how good it is already. I'm here today to talk a bit about the Healthy Shed program, so I've got some flyers here too. So the Healthy Shed program is currently being held out at Kings Meadows, and we're running it on behalf of the Veterans and Community Wood Centre. So this is the third time we've delivered this free program. We've also done it in Rocherlea and Ravenswood in the past. So this program's 10 weeks, and a little bit of background information to what Healthy Shed is for those that don't know. So back in 2016, we were working in a shared space with some university staff and researchers. And one of these researchers was Professor Lee Kinsman from the University of Tasmania. Professor Kinsman did a health literacy project in Ravenswood with members of the Ravenswood Men's Shed, asking them what their health concerns were. So over a cup of tea in our staff room, we realised that Professor Kinsman had the key information and we had the perfect project idea to help address them. A true collaborative approach. So partnering with the Starting Point Neighbourhood House, we applied for a grant and ran the first Healthy Shed program in 2018 in Ravenswood. Then it was Rocherlea's turn in 2019, this time partnering with the Northern Suburbs Community Centre. Then, of course, with some time delays due to something called COVID, the current program is the third edition in the Kings Meadows community. In this free program, the participants learn about health literacy, managing back pain, understanding your prescribed medications, being more organised, looking after your feet, stressing less, having respectful relationships, saving money, and knowing what happens when we need surgery. Whilst the concept of each Healthy Shed program is similar, run a free program in a local men's shed with multiple topics on improving one's health, each program's schedule differs as it is chosen by the members of the local men's shed themselves. So we know it's relative and specific to their needs. So when we ask the participants at the current program why they've come along, they often say a similar thing. I knew I needed to do something to help myself, but I didn't know where to start. This was a free program, and I knew there'd be other blokes I would feel comfortable in this setting. There was one bloke I remember who we called Dennis, who had a big bushy beard, wore stubby shorts and a high-vis shirt, saying something along these lines, in addition to seeing if the program could help fix his leg as well. Personally, one of the more touching things I noticed was many participants are happy to admit they have or are suffering from depression and anxiety. Being that most of the participants are men, 65 years and older, they've probably grown up in an era where admitting feelings and showing vulnerability could be considered a sign of weakness. This program has generated a lot of interest to the point we've had to move it next door to the Kings Meadows Bowls Club just to fit everyone in. We are now currently in discussions with the Tasmanian Men's Shed Association to see if we can launch more Healthy Shed programs across Tassie. So the Kings Meadows program finishes on the last day of this month with a celebration barbecue and some health and hearing checks. If any of you are nearby, we'd love for you to drop in and join us. We look forward to continuing to grow and develop this great program with our partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hayden, and thank you for the work you do in our community. Just appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you.
We have public questions on notice. Is there from the previous meeting? Public questions without notice for today. No? There's none? No? Yes. Oh. Sorry. Mr Mayor, I have firstly a question about an item, a document on the agenda 18.1. It's called Launceston Network Operations Plan. Just so that I can understand. Oh, I beg your pardon, I'm sorry. Robin Smith, on behalf of Coffee Republic, a business in the Brisbane Street Mall. The Launceston Network Operations Plan, stakeholder listed as, of course, the Council and DSG, Department of State Growth. It lists two bicycle groups,
and a motor club. I take it that's the only consultation. I hope not, but I can only assume that. And the operation plan, perhaps an officer is able to see if it quantifies the traffic on the A3, which is the through traffic, as opposed to that traffic which is local traffic. Perhaps an officer would be able to.
Sure. CA, or do we? Shane.
I'm not clear exactly what you're asking. In terms of the consultation, I must say that what went into the document was input from the transport strategy. We've got the City Heart master plan that was done many years ago, a number of previous pedestrian strategies. So the plan is about determining who has priority and what we're managing different routes for in terms of priority. But your question around local versus highway, I'm not clear on what you're requesting. I'm happy to have a discussion.
Traffic numbers.
Traffic volumes?
Yeah.
I don't have them off the top of my head.
Thank you. The next question is the associated document with the same agenda item, Central Activities District Parking Implementation Plan. Has Duchesneau Way, well, it has two figures, figure 8 as proposed for loading zones and figure 9. With respect, I might be drawing this to Council's attention, but they seem to be wildly inaccurate, those two figures as for the loading zones. Don't mean to be disrespectful, but there's about 17 or 18 errors in them. But importantly, today, where I work in the mall, it doesn't seem to be well provided for in the future, and nor with the loss of those in Duchesneau Way, which are very useful as well to support deliveries into the mall. Is this a proposal that is, if the bus interchange goes ahead, the loss of the loading zones in Duchesneau Way? Or is it an error?
Shane, you want
I must say the proposal is based on the current conditions, and so it's intended, as the methodology explains in the report, there's a process in how additional loading zones have been added and some have been removed around distance between each other, and so we've applied that in this case.
Thank you. The excuse me. The third question is, whereas Launceston has a one-way system, so does Hobart. They have Liverpool Street, Murray, Collins and Argyle. It seems to work well there, and I don't hear any cry in Hobart or Launceston for any of those streets to be turned into two-way. If it wasn't for the bus interchange proposal in Duchesneau Way, is there any great cause for those streets to be made into two-way as proposed?
Oh, Shane, you can answer that.
So the conversion of one-way streets to two-way was a decision made by council as part of the Launceston City Heart project, which master plan, which predates any decision around the bus interchange. The primary focus is about slowing traffic and making the CBD more pedestrian friendly.
He knows. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Are there any other people asking questions? No, thank you. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in agenda item 9, Planning Authority. So we have item 9.1. We do have two speakers for 9.1. The first being Kate Murray.
Good afternoon, I'm Kate Murray and we have a business at 17 Brisbane Street, 2 doors up from 31 Brisbane. Initially, we were very concerned about the change of use of that building to house at-risk youth and its ramifications on our business, because we have a small boutique hotel, and that whole area is often considered the arts precinct of Launceston, with the design centre, lots of hotels further up Brisbane Street. But upon further reflection, we are more concerned about that choice of a building being the wrong location for at-risk youth, because that building has no outdoor space. And I know from talking to the builder or one of the fellows I saw there one day, they're going to provide a basketball hoop and a barbecue, which I would have thought was hardly helpful for at-risk youth. The property doesn't have any green space, no garden, no trees, not a blade of grass. There is minimal outdoor space and barely an outdoor play area. So we would have thought that maybe the choice of 31 Brisbane Street is quite inappropriate for youth of that age. That there's lots of research being done on the benefits of outdoor space for youth, and there's certainly none there. Just a few other points. Reading Emily Baker's article, she talked about a therapeutic model of care for at-risk youth. I would have hardly thought that location would provide that. And Sarah Courtney, the Children's Minister, talks about a unique opportunity in the state to build one of the world's best youth justice systems. Well, I think they need a better location overall for youth that does have green space and outdoor area. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's your time. Wendy Robbins.
Hi, I'm Wendy Robbins. I have the Hotel The Royal Oak, 14 Brisbane Street. And I think Kate has covered absolutely everything that I probably would like to say. I have no expertise in the area regarding at-risk youth, but yeah, I just believe it's a building that doesn't encourage growth and care for at-risk youth. So that's about all I have to say, really.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Thank you. So we have item 9.1. Somebody happy to move? Councillor McKenzie moved. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
I do, Mayor. I guess probably there are a couple of things with this particular application. I think it caught a number of people by surprise as to what the use of the building, and I fielded a number of phone calls in relation to its use. But then when you drill down, we sit here as a planning authority today and make decisions under the planning scheme, and communal housing is actually a permitted use within the area, and as a consequence of that, we then need to look at what other discretions or what discretions have actually been used in relation to making a decision to put a proposal forward and support the development. And there are basically four discretions that have to be considered. Private open space is one. The use standards is another one. Excavation was a third one, and the final one was car parking numbers. So they're the only four discretions that actually have been triggered in relation to the assessment of this proposal. In relation to the private open space, and noting that the speakers spoke of no green space, and the answer is no, there is no green space in there, but there's some 90 square metres, or actually more than 90, about 160 square metres of actually private open space. It doesn't quite fit the configuration based under the standard, and therefore need to go to performance criteria, and the officers have judged that it does fit the performance criteria, and noting that from a green space point of view, there's the parks to the north, to the south, which is the swimming pool area up and around there. There's plenty of park area, and to the north, which is City Park, where recreation can be dealt with. As to what these young people at risk are, we are not privy to that, and it would have been nice of community housing to actually inform us of what they're actually proposing to do in there, but it's their right not to do that. It's their responsibility to deal with what goes on inside the boundaries, and how they deal with people at risk is their area of expertise and not ours. We're here only as a planning authority. In regards to the use standards, I think the only challenge in regards to that was that there's actually a residence on the ground floor. And again, based on the assessment of the performance criteria, the officers believe that that was well and truly met by the performance criteria. The excavation issues were in relation to disturbing the soil, because I think there was once a petrol filling station there many years ago, but there have been no sort of views through, no evidence through their ESA in relation to that. And I guess that there's still the site contamination of building, and as they build and they find site contamination, then they need to get that checked, so that becomes a building issue. And in regard to car parking numbers, slightly under numbers in regards to the number of bedrooms within the premises, but on the basis these are youth at risk there, most of those won't be driving cars, so the only people that will be coming to visit them will be people to come and visit. And as explained in the documents, there are car parking spaces on street, and there are also sort of off-street car parking within a couple of 100 metres of the site. So as a consequence of that, in the main, the performance criteria clearly cover those issues. There was one other issue that was raised by one representative, and that was in relation to a tree. That was explained by the officers that the tree actually wasn't part of the DA. They actually didn't need a permit to take the tree out, and they actually determined to take the tree out prior to the DA being applied. Unfortunately, the tree was removed, I think, during the advertising period, which may have confused some of the representatives in relation to whether that was part of the DA. But as it's not required to have a permit to take it out, then we really had no control over whether the tree went or didn't. So, unfortunately, what it's being used for is not something that we actually have any power over. All we can do is assess the application being a communal house, which is allowed under the scheme, and then look at the various conditions which we need to have a look at the performance criteria and see whether they're appropriate or not. And in the terms of what I've read through the papers, those assessment against the performance criteria would make this something that we should pass today.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor McKenzie. You've covered off most of my points. The only thing I would say is that this is an at-risk facility. It is not a secure facility. The youth that are placed in here are at risk of being homeless or not being able to sleep safely at home. And to me, that isn't their fault. And in fact, it's very much what you must remember, that these are children who have, through no fault of their own, ended up in this position. And therefore the state is looking after them as a transition to perhaps a safer environment. That transition can take a week, it could take up to a year. Having the building in the centre of town will enable any of those youths to still remain at their high school, and any of the high schools, whether it be Brooks or Kings Meadows or Prospect, would all be but a bus trip away. To locate such a facility in a suburban area, whether it be, Prospect, Riverside, whatever, could mean that some of those people who come at risk then have to catch multiple buses to continue their normal life or change schools. So from those of you who look at it and say, not in my backyard, we want to have it somewhere else, a CBD location actually makes a lot of sense from a point of view of all the other services that are needed for these youths at risk. And as such, it was used as a family home. The children who grew up in that, my daughter worked for them, and they had no great problems for the fact that they didn't have a blade of grass, but they did in fact have the best park in the world across the road, and their father didn't have to mow the lawn. So from that point of view, I think it is, as we said, perhaps from a planning point of view, it's pretty basic. The private open space and the car parking are the two major issues. But I think if you look at the other considerations that people have raised, I think having it in a central location is actually preferable to being in a suburban location. Happy to support this motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. As the other two speakers have alluded to, I think this is a relatively simple planning matter. It's not necessarily a simple social matter, but that's not what we're being asked to consider today. The permitted change of use from residential single dwelling to residential communal residence is permitted, and as has been referred to previously, what happens in terms of that communal residence model is not for discussion as a member of a planning authority. What is up for discussion are the matters of private open space and car parking numbers, as well as use standard and excavation. And I think we've heard quite clearly, and we've seen in the report from the officers, that in terms of the car parking numbers, and certainly in terms of the private open space, that it's just, it's not a defendable thought that the lack of open space on the property could be defended if it went to appeal, based on the fact that the city park, and indeed the park that the aquatic centre is in, is within a block's radius, is provided for. So, irrespective of any conversations around its use, it's permitted and should be supported today.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I am, struggling with this, partly for the reasons outlined just then by a deputy, that there is limited outdoor space that is relying on performance criteria. The parking, may also be an issue, but it would seem, there's some concern that this may not be the most appropriate building for this particular use. And I understand that that's not exactly what we're here to decide through comparing it to the planning scheme. But I think that this story goes back a little bit further somehow. This is a state government initiated response. They've gone out and bought this building for this purpose, and yet it would seem that this building is not fit for purpose. It does require changes. It doesn't meet the standards that are required for this particular use. That's problematic. It's more problematic that the state government didn't consult, as far as I'm aware, with council in that process. Council has an active participatory interest in people who are at risk of homelessness, and of course we would like to be involved in those solutions. I'm sure most of the people in this community would like to be involved in those solutions, but it would seem in this case that a decision has been made somewhere in some state department that this is the appropriate place for this to occur. Now, I can see the arguments that by and large it does meet that criteria, but I can also see problematic elements to it, not least being the limited amount of outdoor space. You would think it would be more ideal for teenagers to have a little bit more abundant space. You could argue that they can cross the road and go to a park and there is open space, but it would be nice that the facility also provided that. It would be nice that the facility already was accessible for people who may have a disability. It's not. It has to be adjusted accordingly. It would be nice that a building that is housing youth who are under the age of being able to drink and not located near a public house that does have people who will be drinking, who will be inebriated at times. I think that's slightly problematic too, to put, very different types of businesses, for want of a better word, in an adjacent location. I'm not saying that that is the case that those youth will be the cause of any problems. I'm not even saying that inebriated adults would be the cause of those problems. I'm just saying that I find that somewhat problematic in that location. Again, that's not something that we can consider under the planning scheme, as I'm sure other councillors would be happy to remind me. So,
I was just about to do that.
So at the end of the day, all I'm left with is this ability to not agree to approve this because of the limited amount of space that is attached to this building. And I do believe I will do that. And I'll also encourage state departments who are invested in finding solutions for people who are at risk of homelessness, endeavour to work closely with the council to find appropriate solutions. That would be a good thing.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Preece.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question to about the access that's going to be made at the front of the building for a disability access. Will there be a loading zone out the front for ease in regard to offloading and loading of a disability appliance so that they don't have to park either on Tamer Street on the hill or go into the back of the building there and unload and walk around, wheel around to the front of the building?
Is that Richard or Duncan?
Thank you. No, there won't be a loading zone out the front or anything such facility as that. The principle is that the gate at the front will be open to allow, dare I say, pedestrian traffic. So a pedestrian in a wheelchair will be able to come through that gateway and use the platform lift to get onto the front veranda and to enter the building at the ground floor level from that side. But principally, though, disabled access is going to be there for residents. If there is a resident in a chair, then if they're coming in a vehicle, they'll come into the yard and access the premises from that side. If they've been out with others to the park, for example, then they'll come in, no doubt, through the front entrance.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't think the parking's an issue because of the youth. I think I will be supporting this one. It complies, it's consistent. All I can say, there's no houses around this building for at least 100 metres. So I think it's not a bad location for it, actually. All I can say, if people have troubles, businesses around there, they should contact the state department that's running this to say, listen here, this is what's happening. The management and caretaker should be taking responsibility and keeping these children in check instead of letting them come in at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So I think there's got to be some rules in that. So, but I think I'll support it because it's no housing around it and it's in the middle of town where they've got the park and they can travel to school. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. There are a couple of houses nearby. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm leaning towards not supporting this motion and I sympathise with the speakers. Coming from a pretty solid hospitality background in the CBD, I don't think it's a good idea mixing a troubled youth building and facility in a busy street next to some very busy and successful businesses that operate in the nighttime economy. The frustrating thing on council, which I've learned over the last couple of years, is that this is a planning authority and I can say and think what I want, but this, I feel, will get overturned. I just wanted to voice that I won't be supporting it.
I think we have to be really careful with the words that we use, really careful around the definitions and the describing terms as a member of a planning authority when we talk about troubled youth and when we talk about disadvantaged youth and when we talk about youth that are going to get back at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. in the morning. I think we need to stick to the planning facts, the 4 discretions that require approval, and keep all of the additional stories and thoughts to outside the planning authority.
Yep, thank you. I support that. Thank you. Any other speakers?
Well, further point of order, Mayor. I sympathise with the Deputy's concerns, and sometimes people don't use the most appropriate terminology. We're talking about at-risk youth, and I'll just note that we haven't been given a lot of information in regards to that. It's not necessary for that to be provided, but nonetheless, that dearth of information does create a certain amount of consternation. And again, that's not necessarily part of...
It's not part of planning. I think we can move on.
But it is in terms of the use of the building, and we are making a change of use. I know that's a simplified change from residential to co-residential, but nonetheless, that is a part of the decision making.
Thank you. No other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close.
Yeah, I stand here and again, I do shake my head every so often. We are here as a planning authority. I sometimes wonder, I now sort of question sometimes why people wonder why councils are actually given the decisions to make in regards to the planning scheme, because that's what we're here to do. And quite frankly, and again, I empathise and sympathise, and I thank the people who got up and spoke, but the reality is we're here as a planning authority, and there are 4 discretions that we have to make our decision based on here today, and that is about private open space, it's the use standards, it's the excavation, and it's the car parking. And they're the 4 things that we should be making our decision whether we think it's the right thing for people to be outside, because quite frankly, there are young people who live in the street where your hotel is, Councillor Daking, so the reality is they can get out and about during the night and have to deal with the nightlife as well. So, you know, for us to make those judgment decisions, that is not our job. Now, yes, I might be disappointed that the state haven't spoken to us and told us what's actually going on inside it, but the reality is they didn't need to tell us. They made a decision to buy the house and then to convert it to communal living, which is within the zone purpose, which we've been quite appropriately told by our officers. We only have to decide, I believe, in relation to whether we accept the performance criteria met for those 4 discretions that have been amplified in the application. So to me, I've been through it, I've looked at them, and unfortunately for the people who have made representations, what would they like to have? And maybe if I lived there, I'd like to have the same thing. I can't make that decision based on that. I can only base it on the discretions and the planning scheme that we've got in front of us, and I believe that the discretions are quite well within the performance criteria, and therefore we should be supporting.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's 2 against, the rest are 4. The motion is carried. Go to 9.2, Crown Mill. Somebody happy to move that one? Councillor Mackenzie moved. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to speak to it?
Just briefly, Mayor, I mean, this is an interesting one only from the point of view of the fact that no noise attenuation has been done on the floor that the Pilates studio is operating on. Normally, under the determination what a Pilates studio is, it's reasonably quiet, but this is a Pilates Strong, which I think has rowing apparatus and noise, according to what I saw on Pilates Strong. So as a result of that, the potential amplification of noise is something that needs to be considered in relation to the operation. And as I understand it, is only in relation to discrete uses. What's that? Sensitive uses, that's right, sensitive uses, of which the sensitive use sites that were determined for around it were the 2 hotels, being the Verge behind and the Hotel, whatever the hotel is there, Grand Chancellor, on the other side of the road, and the tenancies within the building are not deemed to be sensitive uses for the purpose of determining whether noise. The issues in relation to noise are actually determined by the tenant and whether the noise is reasonable or not, and therefore that probably is something they should take up with their landlord in the first instance, and I guess if they're then outside of the noise amplification which is reasonable, then refer those matters on to council as a matter for us to deal with as a issue post that. So the reality of it is only, I think, about noise standards that I'm interested, that I think is any issue in this particular instance, and I think that based on the comments made by the officers today, we can't take into account the noise in relation to the building itself, inside the building, and that's something that the landlord and the tenants of that building will need to deal with. I did note one representative was concerned about the access. The patrons were coming in and out at all times during the day, in and out of the building, and they used therefore they were concerned about the safety, I guess, of the building when they came in out of ours. Again, not a matter that I think that we should be involved in. That's a matter, I think, for the tenant and the landlord to have conversations about and try to manage that. And hopefully there will be reasonable dialogue between the tenant and the user of that space, and making sure that the landlord, I guess, is managing the processes of all the tenancies that it has inside the building.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. I just, in listening to Councillor Mackenzie, talked about the strong Pilates, and yes, certainly it seemed to have amplified music on the website that I had found. And I'm just reading that item 2 says no amplified music. No amplified or percussion music is to be played within the Pilates studio. Are we able to perhaps tell us what that might mean from a planning point of view? Because that seems to be contrary to what I understand might be happening.
That's a condition.
Just in front of the microphone.
Bring it down.
That's a condition given by health services and means non-amplified music or percussions music to be played within still Pilates studio. I believe that this means that it's not music which is very loud music and that's what I believe, that it's not music which will affect other tenants, I believe. I really don't know. I don't mean, what is the question? What is amplified music?
Well, that was my question to you, yes.
It's a loud music, so this loud music is not permitted.
I mean, is it live versus recorded, perhaps?
Richard Wilkes.
What, Richard?
In our context, when we put no amplified music on, it means music that's being used with an amplifier. So anything that's loud or uses an amplifier and speakers, that's essentially where we're at. Sometimes it's used in the context of hospitality venues to determine somebody playing an acoustic instrument or an amplified instrument, but the principle is the purpose of it is to stop loud music.
Right. Thank you. Question from the Deputy Mayor.
I think probably it's been answered. I mean, it seems a quandary to me that with regard to the urban mixed zone, there are only those requirements with regard to the sensitive use. But I think probably, and my question is, you're suggesting that it'll be self-managed, because indeed if all of the other tenancies have got issues with the noise that's being created from this particular DA, there'll need to be some management that the landowner puts into place in order that they can coexist, or they go through MCA. Is that correct?
Richard.
That's essentially correct. I mean, it would be my understanding that the building management would be the first point of call. If that can't be resolved, then there's the opportunity to speak to the council health officers who have a process to deal with noise complaints, and that's a monitoring and then a discussion. And if it can't be resolved by further intervention from the health officers, there is enforcement proceedings, including notices and ultimately fines, should it need to get to that point.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, do you wish to speak?
Only very briefly, because I was fairly comfortable that with two discretions, one about noise and the other one about bicycle parking, there wasn't much to talk about. But it does seem like the noise level will be something that will have to be handled in the first instance by the building management, and then ultimately, if necessary, they will involve council in enforcement or otherwise, or perhaps the EPA or whatever they're called nowadays. So from that point of view, I think there is very little for us to disallow this particular planning application, so I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker?
Yeah, it is a little strange that we're being dragged into a dispute about noise that hasn't occurred yet, but that seems to be what's happening. In any other situation, it would be the landowner's, issue to resolve, if not to another authority other than the council to resolve, perhaps even a police matter. But in this case, it does seem straightforward. The person who owns the building will have to deal with the other tenancies if that is the case, that this is problematic. I note that people do say, even when the Foundry, if anyone's ever heard of the Foundry, I'm not sure, but they don't seem to be there anymore, that even the noise that came from Foundry was problematic at times. So it would seem that as though the building is quite porous when it comes to the noise. However, the use seems to be straightforward and permitted, and I just hope that the parties involved can find ways to resolve that, so that if there is no consternation caused, and I'll be supporting it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Yeah, thanks for everybody's contribution. As I say, I think it's a noise issue, and I think the more I've looked at it, it becomes the landlord. He's going to be the arbiter and deal with it because his tenants are going to be annoyed with him in the first instance, or her, or them. Sorry, Andrew. Them. So the reality of it is, we'll be second down the line in regards to that. So he'll have to deal with disgruntled tenants if there's a noise issue. And again, given the fact that we're actually not required to do this, we only look at it at sensitive areas, then I think that this is a pass.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we move on to 9.3, 15 the quadrant. I don't think we've got any speakers for this one. So Councillor Harris moved. Seconded. Councillor, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris, you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, 15 the quadrant, 6 discretions to have to deal with, providing some alterations to an existing building, adding a 3-bedroom residential apartment as well as a single-bedroom Airbnb at the rear of the property, but retaining the ground floor retail space where it accesses into the Quadrant Mall. So this is an application that I think is what should be encouraged if we want to see more people living in the city. It's exactly what we want to see. The upstairs space being utilised for living only adds more people to the CBD, and I think it's a particularly good example of how you can work within the constraints of a restricted site to develop a 3-bedroom apartment, but also still retain the CBD shopfront, which is an important part of the Quadrant Mall, and also retain some of the heritage functions of this particular building. There was notes made about the tiling, and you can see that on the outside of the building. Whilst there were some concerns raised by the St Luke's Health building next door, they do seem to have been allayed, as have some of the concerns about where the builders, when they're building the building, may park, and I think they have also been subject to discussion with the car park owner and landowner there, and they seem to have been resolved as well. So overall, I think this is a good development for our city, and we should have perhaps more of it within our CBD. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker?
Yeah, just to note that the heritage decision that went with this, that avoiding the impact on the Quadrant Mall building facade, I'd sort of encourage people, if they haven't seen it or they're not familiar with it, to go and have a look. This is 1950s building facade, I suppose, of which we have a few examples around Launceston, but it's interesting that the Heritage Council make this provision. You could well imagine that, it might not be considered significant, but because of the tiles and the facade, the extruded, I presume, perhaps aluminium, maybe stainless steel, window front, to see that retained is an important part of the, rich tapestry of our built heritage, and it's, good to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer?
Just one question about the weight of the concrete trucks when they come in there. Will that affect any of our property?
Richard, is that for you? Shane.
Obviously, the access through there is load limited, so they have to comply with the limits that are in place.
Well, it's 4.5 tonne or something, is that right?
I think that's about right, yeah.
Oh.
So they have to come up with a plan how they're going to build it with not exceeding that weight limit.
Mini trucks.
Thank you. Any other speakers or questions? Councillor Harris? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We now no longer sit as a planning authority. So go to Mayor's announcements. Can I say it was a real pleasure, and it's already been said tonight about officiating at opening night of Mamma Mia. So congratulations to Encore. I think Encore do an absolutely amazing job in our city, and they have, over the last 12 years, I think it is now, been fantastic in growing our local talent and working with our local talent. And congratulations to each involved, and especially our Deputy Mayor. Thank you for the role that you play in that as well. It is well done, and I know from all reports it's been very, very well received in our city. It was great to attend the Trevelyan Community Hall Trust plaque. Councillor Dawkins was there as well. It's an amazing work they're doing in that trust. The group that are working together, and they've done a fantastic job to, if you haven't been in the hall recently, have a look at it. That's new ceiling, new windows, and it's really looking fantastic. And I know it does get a lot of use in our community, so it's really great to see for the work that that committee is doing, and I thank them for their continued work and for the support of that community hall. It was good to attend Launceston College last night, their special awards ceremony, and it's always great to go to Launceston College, or these young students, and just to see how so many of our students in our city are absolutely amazing young people. What they're already doing, what they are already involved in, whether that's sport or helping in the community, is amazing on top of the studies they're doing. So absolutely fantastic. It was really great. And I wish all the students from 11 and 12 that are sitting exams next week all the best for the weeks ahead, because it's been a hard 2 years for them. And I really hope they all do extremely well, because we do need them to continue to come through and continue to be active in our community. That's it from me. Councillor reports. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. 4 things that I'd like to share today. The first is, had pleasure in attending the annual general meeting of City Prom last Monday evening, where a year of challenge but also a year of opportunity was celebrated with regard to City Prom. I think everyone would agree that some of the marketing undertakings, including the Love Lonnie campaign that they activated, was certainly very successful, and we look forward and know there's lots of work happening behind the scenes in terms of the future work of City Prom. But it was a real pleasure to attend on that evening and to hear the positivity of the members. There were a good number of members present who were all speaking of how a renewed focus on marketing, on activation and working collaboratively has really set City Prom's year ahead of others. And we know through Councillor Daking that the board, under the leadership of Monica, together with staff Amanda, have had a great year. And so I'll pass around, for anyone who's interested, a hard copy of the annual report. But well done to City Prom on a great year. The second thing, Mayor, was on Tuesday. I had pleasure, before you attended last evening, on Tuesday during the day to attend the graduation ceremony for Launceston College, when each of the graduating Year 12 students were presented with their certificate, and also some service awards were presented as well. And like you said last night with the special awards, it was incredible to see so many hundreds of students graduating from just one school, but all seated together and thinking of the 2 years that they've had, like never expected, unprecedented times in terms of young people, and still to see the level of attainment. So as the City Council's rep on the College Association, it was great on Tuesday to be present for that. Item number 3, wanted to reference the great work of Self-Help, another really outstanding organisation within our community. They also had their annual general meeting during the last 2 weeks, and I guess to see the level of tenacity that organisation under the leadership of Donna Bain has put in over the last 12 months with COVID, providing employment for people within our community who have a disability, but also looking out for their mental and physical health during COVID, has been pretty amazing. And so all power to them and the great result that they had. I'll also pass around their annual report for anyone who is interested in taking a look. And the fourth thing, Mayor, that I'd like to reference, it's particularly relevant, I think, from an arts and cultural perspective, but indeed from a wider perspective from the City of Launceston. I'd like to note the passing of arts and cultural legend Annie Gregg this week. Annie obviously is and has been a formidable part of our Launceston fabric. She's been an incredible arts leader. She's been a tenacious operator who has always wanted to get the best cultural and social outcomes for our city. And I indeed believe that where we're placed in terms of our cultural strategy is only because of the work of people like her in the years that have passed. So we certainly send our love to Jen and all of her extended friends and family, and we thank her for her contribution to making our great city what it is today.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, just a couple of things. One, that I attended the Franklin House 60th anniversary along with yourself and Councillor Priest. I think that was all that was here on the 28th of October, which was 60 years to the day that Franklin House was first opened to the public, and in fact caused the establishment of the National Trust, because that was in fact their first property. Attended their committee meeting yesterday, and Julie Deneen, the chairperson, loved the function that we had, as did all those who attended. So they were really very grateful for the council for extending that opportunity to have a civic function to recognise that anniversary, and also perhaps to remind others who are listening that their Franklin House will have a market day upcoming on the 21st of November, and their carols and cakes on the 5th of December. So a little quick plug there. I also attended the Tas Community Fund on the 27th, which was the 21st anniversary of that great fund. Funding that has been used statewide to make our community a much better place. And for those who have a long enough memory, the funds were created from the sale of the Trust Bank, because that was a member-owned institution, and thankfully the civic leaders of the day chose to set up the Tas Community Fund to make this a perpetual funding for community organisations to apply to for annual grants, and I think they're up to about round 40-something, 43 or whatever, and I think it's, we should be very grateful that we have access to this. The fund could have just been absorbed into consolidated revenue at state government. The fact that it wasn't is a great thing for all of our community. Not necessarily with our council hat on, but I just want to recognise that the WBBL had 15 games out at Invermay Park and UTAS Stadium, which I attended a couple. Unfortunately, got rained out on one occasion, and the other one, the Hurricanes didn't win. But it was great to see the ladies down here, and I only wish that perhaps they had the opportunity, like many of us around this table, to go along and see the encore production of Mamma Mia. It was a fantastic production, and I'm sure that had they had the chance to go there, then the reputation of our city would have been enhanced nationwide. Had they had the opportunity to come and see how good a production that was. Having seen it in Melbourne, I thought our production was far superior, and that's not a biased view, that's just my opinion as a critic. With that, I'll sit down.
Thank you. Any other council reports? Council business? Thank you. Councillor Priest.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I too attend the Tas Community Fund function on the 27th, and it was great from a Rotarians hat, having had presentations from Sally Dark in the past about the benefits of the work that Tas Community Fund do. It was great to speak to some of the recipients and hear what their monies have gone towards. I also attended the Accidental Celebrity on 28th and listened to Lindy Chamberlain-Crichton talk about her life with Fiona Reynolds, Dr. Fiona Reynolds. It was a really enjoyable night. It was great to hear Lindy's ties to Launceston and her mentioning by name lots of her ties, personal ties in Launceston. It was a great evening. There were many people there. A lot of people to purchase some books and have them autographed. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? No, thank you. Committee questions, sorry. Questions without notice from councillors? No? We'll move on. Tender Review Committee. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Spencer. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Self-explanatory.
Councillor Spencer.
I just mentioned some of these tenders that we put out, there's not too many people actually tender them from. In my business, we actually tender against 3 and 5 people most times on bigger jobs, but the construction industry, civil works, there seems to be that much work out there. Not many people actually tender on some of our jobs. So it's a pity, but there's not much we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. That is carried. We go to council workshops, 14.1. Move Councillor Dawkins, seconded Deputy Mayor. Councillor Dawkins, wish to speak to it?
Yeah, I just want to briefly speak to the Words at Work workshop. It was difficult, there was no doubt about it. The tech was difficult. It needed to be a really sort of a creative, interactive space, and it's so hard to do that with COVID restrictions, and we acknowledge the difficulties around that. But I think really the takeaway from it all is that all we can do is try. Like, no one's perfect and no one's expecting perfection. And I think to be able to work towards language which is not discriminatory in a kind of light-hearted way is the only way that we as a council can approach this. Part of the reason why it's so difficult to get someone to deliver this workshop was because corporate Australia went through this in the 80s. We're actually lagging a little bit to come to the party around language at work. If we'd done this in the 80s, we would have found that there were a number of providers who would have been able to give really relevant workshops. But to be honest, there's very few workplaces in Australia where this is still relevant. So I think that's really important for us to remember. We're a bit late to the party, but we definitely shouldn't stop trying. And making a mistake, as long as you can acknowledge it and move on, is absolutely human in this situation.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? Councillor Dawkins wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Although that's all councillors present, that is carried. We go to 16.1, Community Grants, Round 1. They've moved. Councillor Stosnicek, seconded Councillor Walker. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Stosnicek? Yeah, well, it's up to you. We've moved a lot, I assumed. But...
Round 1 of community grants saw a wide variety of projects submitted with a particular focus on the physical and mental... with a particular focus on the physical and mental health of the community. It was great to learn about projects such as the building of accessible garden beds, tutoring and mentoring migrant and refugee children, and developing a cookbook in the northern suburbs where we know that access and knowledge of healthy food is an issue. I would like to thank the officers and the committee members for all their hard work. I seek your support for the projects as recommended in the agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to add that it was an interesting mix. It was a slightly different round in that respect. It might have been a slight response to COVID, I suppose, that some of the usual activities that some community groups might be doing are not possible, or they don't have enough confidence to go ahead with those things. But interestingly, people are going ahead with cookbooks and community gardens, very much things that people have focused on during COVID times. So there's a nice synergy there. Yeah, it's good to know that that community groups, local groups, are persevering in these times, yeah, and finding ways forward.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Stoltenchik wish to close? Can I put the motion? Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Now we move to 18.1. Put my mic on. We do have a speaker for 18.1, Mr. Robbins Smith.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. While I support and would be pleased that the Council would consider endorsing and adopting this strategic plan, it does seem to me as a shopkeeper to be skewed towards supporting the bus interchange into Shona Way and cycling and other things, but it seems moreover to be against the motorist. Unfortunately, there's no figures to support what traffic is a through traffic versus those shoppers, which makes it very hard to judge. Perhaps It also shows the value of that particular car park, which is the Deshana Way car park, and the loading zones and the access to the buildings. So if council were to use these documents, of course, bear in mind that not everything would be taken as being given. One of the documents to support in here, the Launceston Network Operations Plan, says Patterson Street will become part of the future primary bus network. It says bus stop B1. And it says restrict, and this is of concern that it does propose some quite unusual activities. That is to restrict general traffic in Patterson Street between Charles and St John Street during peak times, AM and PM. Outside these times, local access only will be encouraged. That is of concern to a shopkeeper, considering we've come out of COVID so well, and we do value those patrons that visit by car. The transport strategy, page 25, is of concern where it writes, parking was previously considered necessary. Driving was the ultimate transport mode. Parking was needed to support it. Parking is treated as a public amenity. It goes on to say, a shift towards public and active transport is beneficial and should be prioritised over private vehicles. Parking plays an important role in this shift as it influences mode choices. Therefore, it can be used as a tool to manage travel demand for cars. So I would say that while these documents certainly are worthy, I would not want to see the council throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Thank you. Don't think we've got any other speakers. So we've got 18.1. Somebody happy to move? Councillor Harris, and seconded Councillor McKenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
I will. This has been a long time coming, the strategic transport plans for Launceston. It will involve the endorsement and adoption of 5 plans: the Greater Launceston Transport Vision, the Launceston Transport Strategy 2020 to 2040, the Launceston Transport Strategy 2020-2040 with a 4-year implementation plan. Nothing like a good plan to have a sub-plan. The Central Activities District Parking Implementation Plan and the Launceston Network Operations Plan. So they are the 5 documents that we will be endorsing today. They do not cover everything, but I think, and there are some things in there that some of us may not necessarily agree with, but they are just strategic plans. They are long-range plans to help shift the way that people do move around the city and through to the city. And if you like, I couldn't help but think that this was a great week to bring this forward. We had obviously in Glasgow the COP26, where we had the leaders of the world meeting talking about global warming. And whilst we here in Tasmania sit back and go, well, all our energy is 100% renewable, or close there too, it is, we're not burning dirty coal and creating the problems that the rest of the world have to deal with. There is the opportunity for each and every one of us to perhaps think global but act local. And in fact, you can do no greater thing than to leave your car in its garage and find an alternate means to travel to work. If you did that 1 day a week, it would be a 20% in your personal reduction for transport if you work 5 days a week. If you did it for 2 days a week, it would be a 40% reduction. And these are figures that Scott Morrison would love to have been able to talk about, but we are just a city council. So for me, I think it's something we need to be embracing. It will be a long and hard thing to break habits of a lifetime, and sometimes many lifetimes. As I rode the bike in this morning, I went past almost every car had a single person in it. And the statistics tell us that 89% of people drive to their work by themselves. 6% of people walked, as some of our councillors did this morning, and only 1 or 2% catch the bus or ride bike. So we need to do more to actually increase that, but it is about personal action. And I do say to each of you that perhaps you can look at what, and anyone listening, look at what you do and say, how can I make a difference to global warming? There is no better way to do it than to take an action that you can control, and that is to leave the car in the shed, out in the garage, and get your bike out, or even better, get your feet out and walk, because we need to encourage that. So this is a very big strategic plan. Obviously, 5 different plans all have to intermesh. there are always going to be some things that some people might not like, whether it be the location of the bus transit centre or some other particular items on there about what may or may not happen in certain streets. Those things are the details, but at least the strategy is there, and the strategy is there for us to embrace our CBD and embrace living in the city and to make that a safer and I guess a more pleasant experience, and that doesn't involve having cars racing through the city at 50 kilometres an hour. It does involve having less cars on our road and having a more fluid movement of people, whether they be on bikes or otherwise. So I'm happy to support this particular motion today and look forward to the other councillors and their opinions on it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd just like to thank the great work the office has done. A lot of people might say a long time in coming, but there's a hell of a lot of work that's gone into all of these plans, and they reference back to lots of other things that interrelate into this. It's not a simple issue, transport. Listening to Mr Smith, and I thank him for comments that he brought to the table, you know, we're trying to turn cars away. The reality of it is the world's got to change, and I think in an earlier comment that he made and the questions he raised at the beginning of the meeting, he talked about Hobart as an exemplar. I'd hate to say Hobart is not an exemplar for traffic and how it manages around the city. It's an absolute mess. It took me 35 minutes to get out of a car park and about an hour and a half to get out of the city a couple of weeks ago. So the reality is their plan ain't working. We don't have those issues in Launceston at this point in time. We've got some pinch points, but the reality of it is our transport, we actually have a chance of actually being able to save the city from the congestion that Hobart's got by actually planning and thinking about where we are. Does that mean a car won't be relevant? The reality of it is a car will still be part of the landscape for many years yet to come. We need, I think, from a sustainability point of view, to be moving to things which are more sustainable, getting away from people travelling on single use, maybe thinking about bus networks, but the reality is we've got to get a better network to make it work properly, and therefore people will change. So therefore, to have a strategy and a plan that actually takes a time period to evolve, give people an opportunity to learn different modes of how to get to and from the city, we'll start to actually educate them on how a better way to make our city work, and therefore planning our streetscapes the way we are, having a bus interchange where people can come to a central location and move out. I mean, I've been trying to get rid of the bus stops since 2014 in St John Street, and my view, and again we're still not there, but a central location for our bus depots is a must from our perspective, and hopefully they're electric or hydro-powered buses not long into the future, where we can actually bring things which actually less exhaust fumes and make it a much more attractive place for us to walk and get about and use the city. The city needs to be relevant because the city's relevant. So therefore that's up to the shopkeepers and us as a city council to set up the infrastructure around the city to make sure that it works and continues to work. And that'll be a continual dialling up of everything and how we do things. But I do commend these plans. The strategies doesn't mean this is the final outcome, but it gives us a direction in which we can head. So I would endorse these strategies today and hope that all the other councillors will support them.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I echo the sentiments of councillors that have already spoken. Look, I'm particularly interested in the review of the CBD speed limit. I think, you know, that's a long time coming, and I think it's probably, by taking our time to get there, it might not be as controversial if we do make decisions about how fast we allow cars to go in the city. Because we're still at 50, knowing that people don't generally travel at 50, whilst other communities have moved through 40 to 30. And there's certainly been a lot of discussion around 30 and electric vehicles, because an electric vehicle is going to really have a lot more bang for its buck at 30 k's an hour in the central area than it's going to have at 40 and 50. So some of these sort of decisions are going to kind of be made for us in the future, and I think it's really important to have our community come along for that ride, have these discussions now, because Tasmania, literally to Tasmania, as we know, is so well placed to be able to remove some of the solid fuel that comes onto the island. We've already got almost 100% renewables. If we can start to move our fleets and our personal vehicles towards that electric grid, then we can start to talk about how efficient we can be as a community with our use of resources. We absolutely have to do this. It's clear, you know, the culture wars around how we use energy are behind us now. They're probably still going to be matters that will be discussed during elections, but clearly it's behind us. So having this conversation now about moving to 40, on the way to 30, I think is really exciting for Launceston. And I just want to remind people who are nervous of that change that the data is there to show that incidental activity is going to be more beneficial for businesses when people are going slower. It's when they're moving straight past to get somewhere else. As I think Councillor Harris has said before, no one's spending anything when their wallet's firmly in their pocket, in their car. But if they're out and about, if they're driving slow enough that they can make a split-second decision to stop and go and buy something, grab a coffee, see a friend, then I think that we'll find there's more activity in our city centre, and that can only be better for everyone.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't be supporting the endorsement of these strategy today, and not because I don't think there's a great amount of work that is valid and really important in there, but there are some key points that I don't support, and I feel in endorsing these strategic transport plans, I would be endorsing those key points. And I think one of them is, that has been mentioned, the bus interchange. I struggle with the idea of taking a prime location in the centre of the city and using that as the bus interchange. I understand all the reasons why people think it's a good idea. I think that if it's such a good idea, you would have one in the middle of other cities as well. You don't. There's many cities much bigger than ours that decentralise their transport systems. That would involve, for Launceston, for example, having smaller bus transit centres perhaps around the city rather than one large one in the middle, dragging all the buses into the centre of town. I know that things will change. We all know that there'll be, electric buses, there'll be e-transport, there'll be all sorts of things coming along the line, and that will also, make the validity of a central bus interchange, somewhat questionable. When I think that there are other alternatives that haven't been fully explored. Of course, there's competing interests, when it comes to something like this. It's not easy for anyone to bring together a cohesive transport vision, especially when Launceston itself has many challenges, similar to Hobart, being a hilly, somewhat constricted network of roads. And so that, I suppose, comes to my next point, which is, if this is to be a vision, a true vision, then it has to go further than just looking at past performance and trying to somehow improve upon that. It has to bring in new concepts, and I suppose you could argue that the bus interchange is a new concept, but we are in changing times, and it is of course difficult to predict what those things will be. But one thing is certain: people will still choose personal transportation devices, whether that is a car, whether it's an electric car, whether it's an e-scooter or a bike. It'll depend on the individual, but especially in towns such as Launceston, where you have to go, let's say, to drop off the kids at a school, go to a specific shop, then go back to work, all in the space of 30 or 40 minutes, being time poor as we all are, that is not necessarily possible using public transport. The idea that somehow more and more people are going to adopt it, if it's somehow a central depository for where you can access it, I don't think is valid. I note also that although the state government has done a certain amount of work on a bridge over the Canamaluca, there's no mention of a bridge in this draft, in this strategic transport plan. So, of course, if that does occur, what happens to the transport plan? It has to change to adapt. The measures that are being introduced in Infomay would all change. The measures that are being introduced to get traffic lights to be in sync with each other, that would change. Many other things would change. The directions that people go to get across town. It's not always easy to get across town. We know we've got the pinch points, as has been mentioned, but we've contributed to the pinch points. We've approved a university to be built in a critical point in our transport infrastructure. We've allowed, on the other side of Inverest, to be developed as big box developments in another critical area of our transport. And I think from a layman's point of view, from an outsider's point of view, they see these things and they see our attempts to remediate as quite contradictory, that we, on the one hand, we allow these pinch points to be created and then we try and remediate, but we have very limited tools at our disposal to do that. There's so much in this report, and it is a huge amount of reading, that there's so much practical, pragmatic, visionary stuff that I agree with, that I would love to support, whether it's getting bicycles off the roads and onto dedicated cycle paths, whether it's building new bus shelters around our network, because I have had people, ask me, is it possible, outside an aged care facility to have a shelter there and things like that. These are really important things.
Excuse me, Councillor Walker, your time is up. Do you need an extension?
Yes, Mayor, please, if the
Somebody
room will
move,
allow.
someone happy to move an extension? Councillor Spencer moves, seconded Councillor Dakin. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. There's so many things in here that are highly worthy, and I would love to be able to support it. But I do believe that there are these critical things that are not included, or critical things that may not come to fruition, or critical things that I don't agree are the great solution for our great city, that I can't stand here and support. Car ownership is up in Tasmania. It's not going down, it's going up. E-transport is something that's coming along. I know that in some ways we consider these things, but in some ways we refuse to accept that people will still continue to use personalised transport systems. We want to try and steer them away from that, and that's a noble aspiration, but sometimes, people will make their own minds for their own decisions, that they are time poor, that they do need to use their own personal transport in order to get where they need to go. We're a small city, we shouldn't have these problems, but we have these rivers and we have these hills that surround us that make the solutions far more required to be far more visionary than we are presently doing. What we're doing presently is taking what we have and trying to apply band-aids where necessary to keep it going along through till 2040. Whereas what I would like to see is a vision, a true vision, that takes it, strips it right back to its bare bones and finds solutions that will see us not just through to 2040, not through to 2100, but in perpetuity for Launceston. And I know that's difficult because the practicalities are we can only do a certain amount of work at a time, we can only achieve a certain amount of things, we haven't got an endless budget. But I would like to see the vision that can be carried out over time that shows me that in maybe 30 years' time, maybe 50 years' time, there are cycleways that go through this city where you don't have to cross a road, where you can use an e-transport device without having to battle with cars or worry about, interacting with other transports. I'd like to see a vision that includes all types of transport equally, and certainly, reducing people's reliance on cars it's a noble aspiration, but I don't think in reality that is something, the nature of our town is that people will always choose to use personal transportation. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. Problems. As far as problems go, I think our transport's a good one. It shows that we've got growing pains in the city, and that's something that I'd like to continue to see. I do support the strategy of the transport strategy. I'd like to see the implementation of some of the key aspects brought forward. I suppose that's my personal preference to a lot of things. In regards to us using our own vehicles, I know, speaking personally, my vehicle is my office, so as soon as I jump in it, I'm on the phone. And that, I'm probably a middle-aged man now, I think, that's probably not going to change, but we need to be changing that for the next generation and the next generation after that, so it is a very long-term strategy. Until they bring out an electric ute, I'll still be driving my diesel one, but I do support the strategy.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. I want to say thank you to our staff for the way that we have collaborated and worked so hard towards getting to this point. I think the way that councillors have had numerous opportunities to engage in this process has been fantastic. And I think the way and response that we have communicated with stakeholders, the way that we've been able to involve people in the consultation has also been very, very good, and is a credit to the way that our staff have gone about that, as is referenced within numerous times parts of what we're endorsing today has come before us. For me, what I think is the most important thing is that we buy into a vision. And the most important thing for me is that we know a fundamental direction that we're heading in. That it might not necessarily satisfy everything that we want to see, and it may not be our own personal objectives, but there's something of us all in creating a vision that has forward momentum. Because if you don't have forward momentum, you don't have anything. You don't have any aspirations, you don't have any goals, you don't have any vision, you don't have any future. You're just kind of in this whirlpool of words. And so what I would say is that having the vision and the documents that are a part of the endorsement today is forward momentum. And it's not perfect, but it's progressing us towards something. And then what each of us have the opportunity over the next life of our term and perhaps into the future, and the people that will follow and the staff that will come and the staff that will go, have something to work towards to make the city better. And for me, that's why I'll be supporting what's contained within today, even though some of the things will never come to fruition, even though for me some of the things aren't as perhaps visionary as I would like, and perhaps there are some things that I don't fundamentally agree with. It's forward momentum, it gives us a vision, it moves us to a new place, and that's what we should be trying to do.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I probably work at 5 to 10 people every month that say about parking in the centre on Launceston. So there's no way I can support this by taking 130, 140 car spots out of the middle of town. They're probably the most popular car park in Launceston, 30, 50 metres from the main shopping centre. I just can't understand it. I would support it if we still had a car park there. It's not a friendly city. All the hills we've got to every suburb is very steep on bikes, so it's very limited how many bikes we can use. Our public transport is our biggest problem. You go to Melbourne, Sydney, you've got trains, you've got trams. It's brilliant. You don't need a car. In Launceston, you do. As far as vehicles go on battery, I drove one that I was really impressed with a couple of weeks ago, and it's probably the future, but the batteries do worry me, what happens to them in the future. There was a fire in one in America, and the fireys couldn't put the fire out. So that is a problem. I can't probably support it because of losing parking. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy, if you'd have the... Well, quite amazing, I think. We spent years and years on discussing a direction, then all of a sudden we get ideas that come out, which is probably interesting, but this is something for the next 20 years. It's not for 30 or 50 years, which others are trying to bring in. We can't keep, you've got to have a boundary somewhere, and this is for the next 20 years to where we want to go. Of course there are going to be some new ideas. There may be a bridge over the Tamer, but this will be adapted when that, if that comes in the next 10 years or whatever it might be. And I tell you, that's a long shot at the moment for the way things are going. If that happens, we'll adapt it. Hey, we can make changes. We can adapt every year, every 2 or 3 years. There's nothing wrong with that, and I think that's a good policy for council to have, continually reviewing what we're doing. So that's something that's fantastic. And people say, look at Melbourne and Sydney, you don't need cars. Well, I've been in Melbourne and Sydney, and there are plenty of cars in Melbourne and Sydney. And I think the cars are part of the problem in Melbourne and Sydney, as in Hobart. So I don't know where some people get these ideas from that we have. Or transport. There is lots of different transport. And what I love about this is that it talks about that people can have moved towards the confidence in doing and have their own choice. Hello, we're not forcing anybody to do anything. We're actually giving people choices. What is wrong with that? What's wrong with somebody saying, I now want to use a bike, or somebody saying, I want to walk? We're giving them the options to do that. We want to create the more options for that we can. And that by doing that, we're going to get more people that will eventually go to a bike or go to an e-bike. If you've got a hill, you want to get an e-bike. It does help you get up the hills. So there are ways and means, and who knows, in 5 to 10 years, there'll be other transport which will be different again, and we'll adapt it. We'll adapt it. What I do love about this whole plan, and thank you to all our staff that have been involved for many, many years and many meetings with us, as the Deputy said, and I agree with the Deputy, the points that he made about buying into the vision, which is extremely important as a council. We can't all agree to every part of it, but we need to all be part of moving it forward so that we can be one council heading in the right direction for our city. We can have ideas and different ideas, and that's great, and we have that in discussions when we have it. But once a decision is made, we do need to support it and continue to work together for it. And what I do like about it too, this vision, the Greater Launceston Transport Vision, has come about discussion with the state government, discussion with not just one council, but discussion with the City of Launceston, which obviously we're involved, the West Tamar Council, Meander Valley Council, Northern Midlands Council, Georgetown Council and the Dorset Council. It's for the region. It's for all of us to work together for the region to come up with a plan, because cars don't stop at boundaries. They'll keep going past and forward. And we have got work to do, and there are great steps have been made already at Invermay. We're starting to see some improvement there, and I'm getting good feedback from people about what's happening there. Sure, we can make some more fine-tuning, and we will be, won't we, Shane? So there's more fine-tuning to happen. But that's something that doesn't mean I don't agree with parts of it as well, but I think we can work together and we can make sure that this, with the region, with the state government on board, will be something that is great for all of us and something that I think we should all support. Thank you.
Back to you, Mayor. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for those words. I had a boss that used to say to me, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. And I do not plan to fail, and the city cannot afford to fail in its transport. So we must have a strategy that goes forward. I do remember at a pedestrian and bike committee meeting, one of the council officers had gone through all of the older plans we're now putting to rest at date from 2009 to 2015. From memory, he had 498 suggestions or ideas that were composed within those plans, and they have all been brought forward. So none of those plans have been lost. They are still there. And as many of you have said, you know, not everything will happen. Any plan has to be flexible. When I would do my annual plan at work, about 70% used to come true, which was always a good result. Some of it you knew was going to happen. Others you always were surprised. But there would always be things that come out of left field that you hadn't anticipated, and that is what may happen with our transport plan as well. E-bikes and e-scooters, I'm sure, are a pretty easy get, that we'll see those, but perhaps an electric driverless Uber will perhaps come out of left field and perhaps be driving us to a council meeting in 10 years' time and not 20 or 40. We've got to remember that the world is changing, and the world is, by definition now, the manufacturer of all the cars that we have here in Australia. And in fact, if you look at what is happening in England, they are proposing that no new diesel or petrol cars be sold after 2030, and that is just 9 years away. 9 years. Norway has sold 75% of their new cars in the last year as electric. A few years ago they sold 2% and mostly were selling diesel cars. These are statistics that will affect the way we operate here in Tasmania, and so we must as a council plan and build the facilities that we need. Building facilities such as the off-road bike paths will take the risk away for those who don't feel, as I do, that they can ride with a car moving within a couple of metres of them along Elfin Road. An off-road bike path will encourage, in fact, 6 out of 10 people to try riding a bike rather than the current 6% of people that the painted line on the side of the road encourages to ride a bike. So those sorts of things will take a quantum shift. Imagine if you took 60% of the cars off the road in one foul swoop. That is what this vision is to take. It's not going to happen overnight, but it could happen. And it will only happen if we endorse a plan and then set up the committee that follows it as the next motion. So with that, I'll sit down and encourage you all to support this tonight. Thank you.
Great, because your time is up. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's 2 against, the rest are 4. The motion is carried. We move on to 18.2, Transport Committee Terms of Reference. Moved, Councillor Harris. Seconded, Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris? Sorry?
The terms of... I will speak to it, thank you. The terms of reference are the practicalities of what we have to do, and that is shut down the Bike and Community Committee and then create a new term of reference for a new Transport Committee. And that's what we're doing with this particular motion, I believe. It's all written there about what we'll be looking at, the role of the committee. It doesn't have a budget, so it doesn't make decisions, but it does have the ability to input. It does have membership outside of the council. It has representatives from State Growth and the Police, RACT, Logistics Council, in addition to the Chamber of Commerce and the Bicycle Users Group and Bicycle Network, and also 2 community members. So I'd expect that some of the existing Bike and Pedestrian Committee members would transfer across to the new one, but there will be some new faces. And most importantly, it will have some different voices around that table, but voices who can make a real difference. So the Department of State Growth, as an example, whenever they build roads, they do have a cycling activities priorities that they're meant to include, but I sometimes fail to see where they've done that. So having them around the table will be most beneficial, I think, for us to fast track those types of developments, so that where any new road is being built, the needs of cyclists particularly, and cycling isn't, the paths that are off-road aren't just built for cycling, they're just as easy to walk on, they're just as easy to ride your e-scooter or whatever, or your e-bike along as well. So this committee's, this is really just a terms of reference for the Transport Committee and how it will actually operate. So now that we've passed the first motion, this really is a bit of a no-brainer. I hope that we will get support all round the table to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. In supporting this motion, I just would like to acknowledge the work of the Pedestrian and Bike Committee, which is going to disappear as a result of this committee being put in place, and also acknowledge the late Jeremy Ball, who was the actual creator of this particular committee, I think, or the one who was the instigator of this committee being formed many years ago. It's achieved a lot of things over the years. I think what you'll find is in past iterations we actually had a semi-transport committee and a pedestrian and bike committee where RAC and others were a part of it. This actually brings it back together and makes it more than just about pedestrians and bike, it's about transport, and therefore holistically talks about roads and a number of other things. So I think what it does is broaden the scope of this group, and it doesn't mean that the voices of a pedestrian or a bicycle user will be any less thing, but it'll be more coordinated into a broader based strategy. I think we now have the strategies which we've now passed. We now need a holistic group of people looking after it, and I think it's bringing some external people with good knowledge and good skills to the table to actually help us advance us in delivering on our transport strategy. So I don't want to throw the Bike and Pedestrian Committee under any bus, literally or figuratively, but the reality of it is this is just an evolvement, I think, to a future generation of what we need to do. So I'm supportive of this new committee.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We move on to 19.1, City of Launceston Annual Plan. Is someone happy to move that? Is it Deputy Mayor? Seconded.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
You didn't get that?
That's Councillor Mackenzie.
So, someone happy to second? Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. Deputy, do you wish to speak to it?
Just briefly, obviously we thank the staff for their work to get us to this point. It's always interesting when you see the work quantified in a percentage scoring, and you kind of sometimes think there must be a lot more going on that we aren't aware of in some instances. So some things for me, the sister city, I was interested to see that at 70%, was also, I guess, pleased to see the rationale with regard to the QVMag audit. And Councillor Dawkins and I were talking about this over lunch. I think for too long we've seen the audit as a project that's going to just be ticked off quite quickly. Of course, it's not going to be like that. The sheer quantity of objects that form part of our collection mean that this is a kind of a new way of working. And as the new General Manager comes on board, will become a new focus of working. I was surprised to see implementation of the cultural strategy at 25%. I would have thought that that would have been lower, but obviously there are some things going on behind the scenes there. And I guess aspirationally would like to see in the next report the placemaking framework, which is only at 5%, improved. I think we've been talking about placemaking for a very long time. I think it's time now that we get some things ticked off in that particular space, and would like to see that happen and would like to see that score improve. Note that there's work that's set to commence in January 2022. Yeah, I think it's time for that to occur, and we look forward to that.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to say, look, it just shows a lot of things that we do in this council in an annual basis. I really just wanted to finish in a question, because I guess where you see 70 and 5 and 2 and 3, I don't really have a sense of whether we think we're on track with our annual plan, because each one's at different levels for different reasons. So I just wouldn't mind posing a question to the CEO as to whether, given this is only the first quarter of this annual plan, as to whether he's comfortable that we've advanced the plan to a level that he thinks we should be at this point in the year.
Thank you. CEO.
So your question is in terms of the overall plan? Yeah, I mean, I would suggest that on balance, most of what's committed to has certainly made an active start, but we've obviously got a fair way to go in the year. I mean, I would make the point that, look, the average or the percentage that's provided for completion is really subjective. It is down to the officers' views largely, and they report that to the General Manager. So we have to take that as an indication of where things are at. Some things are probably less. People might be a little bit more emboldened in terms of where they think they are than perhaps or it might be the opposite. So there's a couple in there that I think we're probably further progressed than we actually are. We're actually further progressed than what we're stating in there. But on balance, I do think we've made a good start to the year. I think, as with always, you'll see things ramp up in the new year, because quite often you're still finishing off things from the previous financial year as you're moving into the new. So, in answer to your question, yep.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor, and I agree that this does give an idea for people outside the community as to the massive amount of work that is done, and the broadness of the work. It sort of covers so many different areas, and the skill sets have to be quite encompassing for our staff to commit to so many of these things. And each of the councillors around the table, and I'm sure the Mayor, have their own interest in certain areas here and seeing those things progress. And I suppose for me, one of the most important is, I think perhaps the last one that is mentioned. Oh no, there are, not the last one, sorry, but to develop a council-wide Aboriginal partnership plan. I'm really proud that the council is taking that on. I understand that it's not yet started. And that these things do take time, but I would say that for this council, 170 years old or so, it is about time that we developed a significant Aboriginal partnership plan that will see in perpetuity this council be able to hold its head up high when it comes to reconciliation with the First People of our nation, and especially of our part of that nation. And certainly I respect the fact that Council also find that as something important and worthy of pursuit. I can only stand here and ask that becomes the priority above and beyond many of the other cultural things that we are doing at the moment, because I think it is the foundation from which we can move forward with our heads held high. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. The CEO wishes to comment.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just in respect of the Aboriginal Partnership Plan, you'll note that that particular project has been moved to my office in terms of it being advanced at that point, and this is one where I'd suggest that we are actually further advanced than what's stated in the percentage completed, because we have been doing some fair bit of preliminary work. We've met with multiple stakeholders, we've workshopped with council, and we're pretty firm in terms of what our approach is going to be. It's just a case of actually resourcing to be able to deliver that. So,
thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.2, annual financial statements. Moved, Councillor
Just noting there's some amendments.
Oh, the amendments, yeah. Councillor Mackenzie moved with those amendment, or that amendment. And seconded, Councillor Harris. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I do. Whilst it's very well articulated, I think, in the report what's gone on, I think the positives are we're a hell of a lot better than we thought we were going to be at the end of June 2021, and I'd like to thank the council for the way it's worked and the officers and how they've done it, but also thank the community, because a large part of this has shown the great bounce back that the community's had post-COVID. Well, it's post-COVID if we're actually post-COVID. That from the COVID period, I guess a large part of our budgeting process was about thinking COVID would go longer and deeper into our community than it actually has. So I think it really shows the resilience that the state has shown in regards to a number of things. But I think that what blows me away is that sort of our recurrent revenues increased. We've got a slight increase in our rates because of more rateable properties which have been developed through the period. A lot of stuff with our services as well, which has come back. Our swimming pools, all sorts of things are up in relation to what's going on in and around the city. We've got some savings that are shown through, I guess, showing some of our problems in regards to recruiting and the basis that we haven't filled all of our positions. So therefore, we've gained some momentum in regards to we've saved some money in regards to payroll, but that's, I guess, hopefully we need to be properly resourced to enable us to fulfil our objectives going forward. So whilst it may work in the short term, it can't be sustainable into the long term if it's not right-sized. I note in there that there's a museum revaluation adjustment, which is a negative adjustment, and that really has come about through, I think, a change in valuation technology and the way that they value items in the museum. Not that we've actually lost any or that they've necessarily gone down in value, but I think rather than the way they value collections, they're doing them in a slightly different manner, which has caused a write down that. But that's been more than offset by increase in values of properties where we've had revaluations or new assets come on board. So our net position as an organisation is still very strong, and a very strong balance sheet with very little debt in relation to it. The only debts that we're actually showing on the balance sheet are interest-free loans from the government, which enabled us to do some of the things that we're doing going forward. I think we've already probably paid the first lot that we borrowed a few years ago in relation to CH Smith. The 9 million, I think, has now been repaid. That went into a current liability, but we've got some others which are coming in which are helping us to do some of the activities that we're doing. But I think that if our city looks at it, they should be pretty proud of the financial position that this council finds itself in. But we need to manage it going forward. It's not sort of all sort of beer and skittles going forward. I know that we have some stresses on our future planning in regards to our losses and how we might operate into the next future. Things like dealing with some of the things in our annual plan, which is the UTAS Stadium, looking at how we deal with QV Mag as a cost centre and so forth going forward, are still sort of little headwinds into the future, but a lot of those are being addressed in our annual plan, which will hopefully mean it'll fit into our longer term strategic plan and financial plan.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Just very briefly, revenue up, expenses down, a $3 million loss instead of an $11 million loss, or an $8 million turnaround. An outstanding result. The staff are all to be congratulated, as is the council. Not much more to say.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Oh, better put the mic on. No other speakers. Councillor Mackenzie, wish to clear Mayor, second to Councillor Dakin. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We're now going to close council.
what the protocol is.
Welcome back. We're back in open council. Can we put us on air as well? Thank you. So can I have somebody move a motion that we endorse the decisions taken in closed? Move Councillor Harris, second to Councillor Spencer. All those in favour, raise your hand. That's all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. Thanks for your time.